Good afternoon, dear colleagues and dear guests. Let me declare open a session of the Dissertation Council for the Defense of Thesis by Vidiasov, Evgenii Yurevich, for the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies, on the theme Institutionalization of the Russian citizen electronic participation in Megapolis management on the example of St. Petersburg. By the order of St. Petersburg University of the 28th of August 2020, number 7510/1, me, Kurochkin Alexander Vyacheslamovich, Doctor of Political Science, Professor, Acting Dean of the Faculty of Political Science of St. Petersburg University, was appointed Chairman of this Dissertation Council. Other members of the Council were appointed with the same order, and let me introduce them to you. In the remote access mode, we have Popova Olga Valentinovna, Doctor of Political Science, Professor of the Department of Political Institutions and Applied Political Research, Head of Department of Political Institutions and Applied Political Research of St. Petersburg University. Smorgunov Leonid Vladimirovich, Doctor of Philosophy, Professor of the Department of Political Administration, Head of the Department of Political Administration of St. Petersburg University. External Council Member Grachov Mikhail Nikolaevich, Doctor of Political Science, Professor of the Department of Theoretical and Applied Political Science of Faculty of History, Political Science and Law of the Historical and Archive Institute of Russian State University for Humanities. And a Foreign Council Member, Donai Lukash, Doctor of Science, Adam Mickiewicz University in Poznań, Poland, our colleague from Poland. Good afternoon. Do you, Council members, can see and hear each other? Is everything okay? Yes, all is well. Over here we have the degree applicant, Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich. Also, the academic advisor of the applicant is present, Chugunov Andrei Vladimirovich, Doctor of Political Science, Director of the E-Government Technology Center, and Ordinary Associate Professor of the Institute of Design and Urbanism of ITMO, National Research University. Andrei Vladimirovich is also online. In order to maintain the quality of communication, dear colleagues working in the remote access mode, please switch off your microphones, but remember to switch them on when you're given the floor. Thank you. Let me also inform you that traditionally our session is being recorded and broadcast online at St. Petersburg University website. The speeches are being simultaneously translated from Russian into English. That's it. During the live broadcast of the Council session, an email is currently displayed, to which, during the session, all the listeners may send their opinions and questions to the applicant online. The questions should naturally be related to the thesis and the current scientific discussion of the applicant's speech. These questions shall be forwarded to me by our technical support department, and I shall read them during the discussion. Let me remind you that those willing to ask questions, the questions should be related strictly to the applicant's speech and the content of his thesis. Also, those willing to ask questions should indicate their full name, position, and place of employment. All questions that are not related to the scientific discussion of the thesis, its text and assessment shall not be presented. In accordance with the order of awarding academic degrees of Candidate of Science and Doctor of Science at St. Petersburg University, approved by the local regulations of St. Petersburg University, a session of the Dissertation Council shall be considered competent if at least 2/3 of the approved members are present, but not less than 4 persons. Let me remind you that our Dissertation Council consists of 5 persons, and at the moment all 5 are present, including 4 members in the remote access mode. Audio-visual contact, as you may see, are online. Thus, let's assume we have the quorum and we can start the session. Let me, as the chairman, set forth the following procedure of today's session of the Dissertation Council. Let me remind you that the approximate duration of our session should not exceed 2 hours. The first point is the chairman's summary report on the content of documents submitted by the applicant and their compliance with the regulation. The applicant's summary report outlining the key points of his study that shall be followed by questions to the applicant. Please ask questions related to the report. Answers of the applicant to questions asked. Speeches of all members of the Dissertation Council in turn with their assessment of the thesis. And speech of the applicant with a summary of their opinions and answers. That shall be followed by the chairman's speech and his assessment of the study and answers of the applicant to questions asked by the Dissertation Council members. And finally, the next point, that shall be followed by the open discussion, speeches of all the attendees online or offline at this session with summaries of their opinions or questions to the applicant. Again, you are kindly requested to register before speaking and introduce yourself. Next, the chairman shall read questions received online during via St. Petersburg University website during the discussion. Answers of the applicant, speech of the academic advisor, no more than 3 minutes, discussion by the council members before voting of the defense results. And let me remind you that for that period, the sound shall be switched off and the discussion shall be held between the council members only. That shall be followed by the open individual voting. The chairman shall count the votes, and the main item on our agenda is making a decision on awarding and not awarding the academic degree. That shall be followed by the applicant's closing remarks, no more than 2 minutes. Dear colleagues, do you have any comments or objections to this procedure? I see there are no objections, and you all agree. Let me start running the session with my summary report. The thesis by Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich for the degree of Candidate of Political Science, specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies, on the theme Institutionalization of the Russian Citizen Electronic Participation in Megapolis Management on the example of St. Petersburg, was accepted for defense by the order of Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University. On the 27th of August, 2020, order number 7437/1. Evgeny Yurevich Vidiasov wrote his thesis at the National Research University, ITMO, under the guidance of a candidate of political science, director of the E-Government Technology Center, ordinary associate professor of the Institute of Design and Urban Studies of the National Research University, Chugunov Andrei Vladimirovich. The number of publications which outline the key points of his research, according to the enclosed list, is 12, of which published in peer-reviewed journals from the list approved by the Ministry of Science and Education of the Russian Federation, 3 publications. In journals indexed in scientific databases, Web of Science and Scopus, 6 publications. And as you can see, the number of publication is more than enough, actually exceeds the requirements. The applicant also submitted to the Academic Secretary of St. Petersburg University a full set of documents to accept his thesis for consideration and defense. All the documents comply with Article 12 of Section 3 of the Order. All the documents submitted by the applicant, according to the information I received from the curator, comply with the requirements and are kept in the applicant's attestation file. Copies are available from the officer of the Dissertation Council Activity Support Department, who is now present and can confirm this information. Before I give the floor to the applicant, do you, dear council members, have any general questions to the applicant and regarding his documents? I see there are no questions. Then the floor is yours, Evgeny Yurevich. Now's the time for your summary report. You have 15 minutes for your speech. Good afternoon, dear Chairman, dear members of the Council. Let me present to you the results of my study on the theme Institutionalization of Electronic Participation of Citizens of Russia in the Management of Megapolis, on the example of St. Petersburg. The work was carried out under the guidance of Andrei Vladimir Chugunov. Relevance of my research is related to the fact that in today's world, digitalization captures all possible spheres. Modern political governance in modern society is closely connected with civic participation. We live in the information society, which implies electronic interaction of the citizens. Now, the exchange between citizens and the authorities is moving into the internet, and the existing communication channels are expanding. In Russia, in 2012-2013, the foundations for the electronic interaction between the government and the society were laid. Today, both the traditional and new digital formats exist. The parallel existence of such formats and communication channels creates a situation where the institutional matrices are layered. The broad development of the electronic participation platforms raises the problem of determining the demand for such channels and their effectiveness. In domestic and foreign literature, the electronic participation has been the subject of research over the past decade. This topic is actively discussed in the works of specialists in the field of political science, state and municipal administration, sociology, information technology, and law. The place of the civic participation in the structure of governance is closely connected with the study of political governance. Despite the presence of quite a large number of scientific publications on the theme of electronic civic participation, there's no unified view on this concept in political science. The aim of my study was in analysis the institutional mechanisms and forms of participation of Russian megapolis residents in the urban administration, using the example of St. Petersburg. On this slide, you may see the list of the main tasks which were implemented to achieve the goal. The object of my study is the electronic participation of Russian citizens in megapolis management. The subject are forms and mechanisms of electronic participation of citizens in St. Petersburg administration. Next slides demonstrate the theoretical and practical significance of my work and scientific novelty. The next slides demonstrate 6 provisions set forth for defense. In the theoretical part of my work, the ideas of transformation of political governance and civic participation in the modern society are summarized, and the conceptual apparatus in the chosen subject is analyzed. We have revealed that the features of modern political governance are influenced by a list of social and political factors. At this stage, the concept of smart cities as an idea of getting citizens involved in administration of the city and improving the quality of life is being actively developed. During our study, their classification was developed based on the analysis of the digital transformations and institutional changes, the crisis of traditional institutions of communication and political representation. Thus, we have determined that a promising area of research on electronic participation is its conceptualization within the framework of the new institutional theory. From this point, the electronic civic participation is an institution in the relations between the authorities and the society. The study was carried out as synthesis of Scott's neo-institutional approach and Scott's concept. The methodological apparatus of the study was based on the previously developed model of electronic participation. The primary information was collected with the help of empirical methods such as questionnaire method, formalized expert survey method, and document analysis. The empirical basis of the study consists of data collected of the following methods. We surveyed 600 residents of St. Petersburg on the technology of interaction with the government and participation in the urban governance. This survey took place in 2019 at MFC of St. Petersburg, and sample is representative of gender and age. Also, we interviewed 15 places of St. Petersburg executive authorities, local self-government bodies, management companies, and other organizations in the field of housing and communal services. The survey was conducted in February 2020 in the format of face-to-face survey. This slide demonstrates the institutional model of electronic participation in a smart city developed as part of this study. According to the proposed model, 6 communication channels between the civil society and the authorities in Petersburg were identified. The first channel is the portal for solving the urban problems. Second, the portals for initiative budgeting. 3, governor's electronic office. 4, crowdsourcing system. 5, the electronic voting system. And 6, face-to-face visits to the authorities. The next slide demonstrates a professionalization of the concept made in accordance with the presented methodology and used in the study. In our study, the slide demonstrates we analyzed the key strategic documents. During the analysis, we revealed a discrepancy between goals and structural elements that determine their achievement. The mandatory inclusion of the citizen's opinion is not included and is only recommended to include their opinions in evaluation of projects placed on the site. Mechanisms to raise awareness about smart cities are quite technical. The results of the citizen survey showed active penetration of the internet. At that, despite its active use, respondents prefer communication channels. No more than 40% of respondents preferred personal face-to-face meeting as a preferred way to communicate with the government, and only 22% of respondents are ready to build communication with the government in a fully electronic form. According to our survey, respondents in general trust the electronic methods of receiving public services, online payments, submission of electronic appeals. However, as mentioned above, subjective assessment of trials did not repeat preferences of citizens concerning the method of communication with the government. In this case, it should be noted the expected effect of deep penetration of the information technology in the form of their preferences for communication is not observed. Respondents expressed their positive experience of interaction in regard to the following: electronic receptions, state services, portal, state and municipal services in Petersburg, citizens' appeal hours in Petersburg, portals of petitions and initiatives. The survey results demonstrate that 46% of the participants were not familiar with the concept smart city. Only 10% of the residents said they clearly understood what a smart city is and how it can be implemented in St. Petersburg. The results demonstrated that only 16% of residents expressed full readiness to participate in this city administration. During the expert survey, we revealed that the majority of experts very often interact with the citizens. Each communication channel was assessed by groups of social, economic, organizational, and technological criteria. In the questionnaire, experts were asked to evaluate on a scale of 5 to 0 the work of various e-sites. According to the results, 76% of experts estimated their experience as positive and constructive, and some decisions were made based on these results. 19% think that as a result of such interaction, certain steps were taken to solve the problem, but it did not lead to effective solution. Less than 5% evaluate such experience as non-constructive. The dialogue did not take place. This slide demonstrates the average expert evaluations of each communication channel. According to the experts, the most popular is portals for solving city problems, electronic reception rooms, as well as personal visits to the government. The study assessed effectiveness of solving various urban issues depending on the channel used by the residents. According to the experts, the site, ours in Petersburg, has the greatest potential in this regard. The expert assessed the greatest expediency of authorities to use the channels as the electronic reception rooms, portals of urban problems, and direct communication. The block of technological evaluation received lower scores from the experts. On the basis of factor analysis, factor models combining the most relevant criteria were constructed. Kaiser criteria. Only factors with a higher value are selected for analysis. The very marks orthogonal method was used. Kaiser-Meyer-Olkin sample adequacy measure and Bartlett's sphericity criteria were used. Thus, survey results demonstrated that St. Petersburg residents use government service portals much more often than electronic participation portals. On the one hand, this state of affairs emphasizes that the electronic services became somewhat commonplace, and participation in petition sites and collection of appeals is an expression of active citizenship. Lack of popularity of such sites is also due to the weakness of the civil society in modern Russia. Using the example of awareness, we revealed that even without a clear idea of what the smart city is, participants tend to see some benefits in such urban innovations. In this case, we can talk about the expected positive perception of the smart city, formed both institutionally, in current terms and forms, and in the context of penetration of new IT. Process of interaction between the participants in the model under considerations in Petersburg were institutionalized through the main three channels: the portal for solving the city problems, a reception room of the governor, and personal visits to the authorities. These channels are most in demand among the participants: citizens, NGO representatives, and businesses. According to the experts, effectiveness of solving a problem or task faced by the applicant will be high if they use the portal Nash Hours in Petersburg, writes an appeal through the electronic reception of all visits an appropriate authority. The institutionalization of the mechanism of personal interaction between citizens and the governor represents is assured by the influence of two factors: efficiency, demand, and experience, as well as minimization of user costs and reliability of the identification system. Discrepancies in current agendas between different stakeholder groups leads to a lack of understanding of the main goals of building a smart city and citizens' participation in its management. The results of the study demonstrate fragmented perception that can undermine the potential benefits for the stakeholders involved in smart city projects. The identified trends point to the importance of constant adjustment of the programs and the need for further research on measures that take into account the degree of public participation in the smart city projects, citizen satisfaction, achievement not only of the stated goals of the program but also of public values. The next slide presents the testing of my study results in the form of scientific articles, conference, presentations, and participation in scientific projects. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Evgenii Yurevich. Let me ask my colleagues and invite them to ask questions. Questions related to the report or the content of the thesis. May I start? I have two questions. My first question is, you use different terms as the concept basis for a study. Electronic participation instruments, institutional environment of electronic and institutional mechanism of electronic participation. How you define the differences between these concepts and how these differences reflected in the empirical study. This is my first question. My second question is, you use Richard Scott's method correctly, regulative and cultural and cognitive. If there is any relation between these different aspects of the institutionalized structure and how it is manifested in the electronic participation itself. Is the question clear to you? Yes? Leonid Vladimirovich, thank you for your question. Regarding your first question, let me tell you that in my understanding, institutionalization of mechanisms of electronic participation is a process of definition of some social needs, public needs. And as an instrument, I'm using it for citizen appeals in my study, because I am dealing with citizens' appeal in one of municipalities, and I often have to deal with these appeals myself. And could you repeat the second question? Connection of regulatory, cognitive, and cultural in the electronic participation. It would be good to use the results of your empirical analysis. I have a table in one of the slides. A regulatory dimension. These are laws which embedded in the smart city concept. Normative, these are empirical indicators, and cognitive dimension, this is perception, means how the applicants perceive. Applicants who apply to these or that authority. And the applicants, I beg your pardon, let me also ask a question. I wanted to ask exactly the same from the institutional approach, where in your thesis you used it and how, since you started talking about this, could you show us some examples, some institutions in the electronic office talk about laws, to demonstrate laws, how these normative institutions, what in Megapolis of St. Petersburg you understand under this is understood under this title. Is the question clear? This is a kind of a commentary. Yeah, this is a request for clarification. As I understand the question, then let me start with the regulatory dimension. This is here, I mean, legislation. In Richard Scott's concept, there are three dimensions: regulatory, normative, and cognitive. I use them in my study because, in my opinion, in these three dimensions, we can trace how it affects working with applications. As for the regulatory dimension, this is legislation and specific. Speaking of specific examples, each authority has its own regulations, orders, which explain how to deal with a particular appeal. As for the normative dimension, according to my results, the normative 16% of citizens are ready to participate in administering the city. So that's how people perceive such innovations, and that's how the residents are involved in managing the city. As for the cognitive dimension, this means positive experience assessment. In my study, 54% were satisfied with the experience on Gosislugi website. Leonid Vladimirovich, Lukash, are you satisfied with the answer? Yeah, I noted. So the question this is the question I wanted to ask, because this, I think, is one of the drawbacks of this thesis. My evaluation is positive, but as for this methodological approach, I am not completely sure, and I cannot fully accept this answer, but I shall remember it. More questions, please? Dear colleagues, may I ask a question? Of course. Olga Valentina, please go ahead. Here's my question. Evgenii Yurevich, one of the spheres of your fields of your study is connected with the structural peculiarities of introduction of e-governance mechanisms in St. Petersburg. Could you please tell us what political factors define these peculiarities, in your opinion, especially if we talk about St. Petersburg? Thank you. Olga Valentina, thank you for the question. In my opinion, first of all, it seems to me that in this relation we need the political will. The governor sends message to the districts. So this is the institutional component of such political administration in situ. May I ask a question? Olga Valentinina, are you satisfied with the answer? Please, to be honest, the answer was very specific and maybe too open because it describes the governance model. Maybe this is not the only political factor that defines such peculiarities, but I appreciate this answer. Mikhail Nikolaevich, here is my question. You said in your speech that the structure for the smart city was ready in 2012, 2013. If we talk about technology, but my question is not so much about the technological component. It seems that we have a number of people using public services. They are ready to participate in the city governance. Your data is 16%. So here I would like to know, so we have this gap between the number of users of public services and people willing to participate in public governance. Doesn't that mean that in the information society, not only in Russia, we live in the consumption society, so where citizens are ready to consume services, but they don't want to get involved. So they are not. It's not that they are not ready. They don't want to do that. What do you think? Mikhail Nikolaevich, could you please repeat the last part of your question after the consumer society? Could you please repeat your question? Yes, my question to the applicant is, don't you think that if, on the basis of your data, that in the information society, a model of the society of information consumption is emerging? So people are ready to consume services, but they don't want to participate in governance. We are facing some what you might call consumer attitude. And the bigger the city, is the question clear? Yes. Thank you, Mikhail Nikolaevich, for your question. I absolutely agree with you. This feature is common in our society, but there are some trends. As shown in my study, that some residents participate in one way or another in city governance. This happens because people are afraid to give their opinions because the governance is quite hard. And in my speech, I said when we conducted surveys, for them, the use of e-services such as online payments or gosuslugi is everyday business. But when we talk about taking part in e-governance projects here, we observe some civil activity, and I think in general our residents are quite afraid of that. Thank you. So you think the people are afraid rather than acting as consumers. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Evgeny Yurevich. Do we have more questions at this point? I think there are no further questions. Then let us move to the next part of our session, speeches of the Dissertation Council members with their reviews and assessment of the thesis, and, of course, answers of the applicant to remarks and questions he receives. Evgeny Yurevich, I suggest that you answer each speaker individually. You agree with that? Not to forget any questions. Is that okay? That would be rational. So first, I'm going to give the floor to our foreign colleague, a council member, Professor Dona Lukasz. Thank you very much. As for the questions, I think that here there will be no problems. Once again, I'm glad to welcome you in St. Petersburg. Hopefully, next time it will be different. And also, I would like to welcome you in Poland as well. Please excuse my Russian. I think I speak Russian quite well, but maybe the word stress is I something get it wrong. But getting back to the thesis of Evgeny Yurevich, first of all the reviews. Well, you saw my review already, and so I will give you a summary in my review. First, I would like to say that the work is highly relevant. It touches upon some relevant problems of city administration, different issues, and different sciences are used: urban sciences, history, geography, evolutionary culture, etc. A special role is played by another problem is the method of city administration, and here it's necessary to. So here this work is rated very highly because of its relevance. As for the thesis itself, the structure is, I have a positive opinion of it. I really liked the part connected with servers. The questions were well structured. This factor increases the value of this study. I should emphasize that the thesis was very carefully written, very logical, transparent, and if I talk about the contents of this paper, I should say that it almost completely complies, but sometimes some facts are surprising. My remarks are as follows, which are included in my review. First, it is necessary to say that this question was already asked by Professor Popova in the political life. And so maybe in the sphere of political life, it is necessary to use other methods. So maybe it was necessary to use the institutional method and decision-making method. That would help to understand the political processes better in the governance of such a mega city as St. Petersburg. Secondly, there was another question about that. In my opinion, unfortunately, there's a problem in this thesis, maybe, that the work itself is based on reliable studies, and so they inserted some framework that fits the work. Of course, I'm talking about the neo-institutionalist approach, a concept. That something Professor Smorgonov asked about of Richard Scott, not George Scott, of whom the author has mentioned. And so that is why I joined the discussion of the neo-institutional approach, how the institutions are described by Richard Scott, how can we find them in St. Petersburg, and thirdly, in my opinion, it's advisable to pay attention to authors who modified their views. And fourth question, and here it's maybe this is not a disadvantage, but in every scientific paper it's always possible to add like what other sources the author should read, but here the work is based on adequate source materials. I would, despite the fact that if I came from Bulgaria, I would mention some Bulgarian sources. So this is not a problem, but some materials in English, I think, should be taken into consideration. The report of Deloitte company is a very good on smart cities. They submitted a very good. They made a very good report on smart cities, mentioned by the author. And what I liked about the work is that the author approaches the smart city concept not by saying that it's very good and should be introduced immediately, but is taking it critically. So this critical approach appeals to me very much. And next, what we can see and should be said is that it's not only theoretical, it's also the study is also practical, and we may see that the author took part in many grants which were aimed at how cities work. This appealed to me very much, and despite some minor drawbacks I have already mentioned, I have a positive opinion of the thesis by Vidiasov, Evgenii, Yurevich. I think it complies with the main requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University, and the applicant deserves awarding the degree of candidate of political science in political institutions, process and technologies. So I will not repeat myself. There should be another question. I will not repeat my question about neo-institutionalism, which we have already discussed. I would like the respected author to show us what advantages and disadvantages there are in this smart city for St. Petersburg. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Lukasz. Is everything clear? Yes. Welcome. Thank you very much for your such a detailed review. Let me give you the following answers. Taking into account the remark of Professor Danai, I'd like to note that in order to achieve the stated goals of analysis, analyzing institutional mechanisms and forms of participation of Russian citizens, the selected methods of data collection made it possible to implement the task sets. The legal analysis was also used in the study to study the strategic documents of urban development in St. Petersburg. The decision-making method could be successfully applied to assess the contribution of citizens to specific methods. This direction can be a continuation of my research. To your next remark, let me tell you, the thesis was conducted within the framework of the new institutional approach proposed by Richard Scott. I apologize for the annoying technical error. This approach has been further developed in the works of Kostov, Labonde, Adams and his colleagues. The logic for selecting tools and evaluation procedures is shown in Table 5. Institutional dimensions of e-participation, Megapolis management. Collection of the empirical material, its process and interpretation were carried out on the basis of the methodology chosen initially. And with the next remark, let me tell you, I thank Professor Danai, as I will read the works of the Polish authors, other foreign sources I know, and as for the advantages and disadvantages, let me tell you, the advantages are there. Interaction with interacting of population online, different projects are in the pipeline. Speaking of minuses, this is technology of implementation of the program itself, project approach, expert development. It's not discussed by the general population. I think this is the main drawback of the Smart St. Petersburg concept. Thank you. Evgenii Yurevich, Professor Donai, are you satisfied? Yes, I am. Thank you. Thank you. Next, I would like to give the floor to, as Professor Donai mentioned already, all the reviews are open to the public, so there's no need to read it, the full review. Just focus on your questions, comments and drawbacks, which you would like the applicant to comment on. I invite Olga Valentina Popova to present the next review. Dear colleagues, I am very grateful for the opportunity to participate in the discussion of this thesis. It's interesting in many respects, though the basic problem of efficiency of interaction with the government in megacities, in any megacity or any major city, is fairly traditional for political science. The factors connected with digitalization of every sphere of life and governance, they make us take another look, a new look on this problem. And here it's very important that this problem is not only technical, is not connected only with management quality in the traditional understanding, but it has the political foundation. And the question that I asked earlier maybe didn't appear provocative. A complex of political factors, one of which was mentioned in his answer, connected with the political will and the scheme of governance. So this complex of factors is important. In this work, I liked many things. I became familiar with this work earlier than the other council members because I acted as a councilman, and it appealed to me very much how the author approached the study of scientific literature, almost all the main themes to be covered when considering this topic are included in his work, including works with information age, understanding of network approach in public governance, institutional foundations of efficient governance, beginning of origins of electronic governance in Russia, the complex smart city complex, and promotion of governance value in various agencies interacting with the population. And I should say that the author of the thesis managed to avoid some dangerous traps which traditionally threaten the authors, where they tried some conceptual foundations and their own empirical projects. Unfortunately, it happens, we often see that these two parts of the thesis are not connected, but here it's not the case. I think the work is very logical, and all the statements in this thesis, I have no doubt that the personal contribution of the author is not only in taking part in 3 grants connected with the topic of the thesis, in 2 research empirical projects. We can clearly see a very good combination of expert surveys and population surveys. So this balance of in opinion evaluation enabled the author to obtain more objective opinion compared to that if he relied only on documents or opinion of the government, the officials. I have no doubt that the way the thesis was tested, I mean numerous speeches at various scientific conferences and the author's publications, and in my opinion a significant fact that the thesis is the defense is taking place less than 6 months after the author graduated the doctoral course, and the fact that in this case we are dealing with the person who has insider information as a representative of city authorities gives us the reasons to trust his conclusions. And I very briefly will mention will give only 3 remarks which are varied, connected with the fact that at the stage of defense of the main, I have already given my critical remarks. So I have already asked, given the author all the criticism before this defense. The first formal or annoying remark connected with some definition of institutional mechanisms and participation of residents. Obviously, in this case, it would be possible to the participation to move to the list of tasks. So that is a formal comment, but I still have to make it. Secondly, as someone involved in empirical studies, I am inside myself, I am very sensitive to assessment of methodology used for empirical studies. You already heard that the empirical study of the population of our city was conducted in centers, and you already know that the sample size was 600 persons. And here I would like to say that the sample was created on the basis of two factors, two indicators, gender and age. Yes, of course, these are the basic indicators, but in my opinion, to solve the task at which the work is aimed, at least the empirical part of the thesis, of course, it would be necessary to consider at least one other parameter, that is district of residence of respondents, which should be taken into consideration. One of the paradoxes of introduction of novel forms of digital administration is in the fact that with a formal forward movement, the population themselves in different cities, they may have different attitudes to these improvements. Well, of course, in the different districts, the attitude could be different. Bureaucracy, governance, and since the time of Max Weber, that it is impersonal, but the human factor still can penetrate it. So this fact in practice may lead to very contradictory results that do not coincide at various locations, even within one city. And my third comment, which I have to make, is connected with the types of, when describing implementation of mechanisms of electronic participation, I think the work would have benefited if the author included such features as both positive and negative effects, and evaluated the systematic, technological, and subjective connected with the so-called human factor effects. Then the author would be able to obtain a more complex scheme of description of such mechanisms that would provide more in-depth answer, connected not only with detailed description, but maybe would identify some additional mechanisms. This is my idea, that in the future, of course, may be rejected, of course. Yet, I think these critical remarks do not affect the high positive opinion of this work. In my opinion, this work, this thesis on the theme Institutionalization of electronic participation of Russian citizens in Megapolis administration, on the example of St. Petersburg, has been performed on a high theoretical level. It strictly coincides to its goal and tasks, and the relevance of efficiency of participation of governance can be assessed as a complete and independent scientific study, which by its content, practical and scientific significance, corresponds to all the requirements applied to candidates' thesis. The text submitted for defense has the necessary elements of novelty. I am deeply convinced that the thesis submitted for defense by Evgenii Yurevich Vidiasov corresponds to all the requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016, order number 6821/1 on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the author, Vidiasov Evgeny Yurevich, deserves awarding degree of candidate of political science, specialty 230002, political institutions, processes and technologies. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Olga Valentinovna. Evgenii, Yurevich, is everything clear? The floor is yours. I would like to thank Olga Valentinovna for a detailed review and high assessment of my work. And let me answer your first comment. In our paper, we tried to highlight the mechanisms and forms of civic participation. For this reason, both of these categories were included in the goal of the study. However, I agree that the analysis of forms could be singled out as a separate task. Speaking of your second remark, indeed, adding an additional feature when calculating the sample would make it more detailed and representative of the city's population in 3 parameters. However, the work did not include the task of inter-district comparison, and in addition, a group of experts were not formed. In this regard, we may conclude that the sample size is sufficient. And also, I'd like to say that the MFC in St. Petersburg, not only residents of particular area are visited, because the automated information system provides access to services and applications regardless of residence, of permanent residence of a particular applicant. And many residents use the centers on the basis of transport accessibility, for example, when it's closer to the place of work or place of real registration of real estate transactions. So they go there and not near their place of residence. And the proposed typification is certainly interesting. In our questionnaire, the focus of the question was on solving and not solving the task questions appeal from citizens. However, the assessment of multiple effects is a separate important task that requires a detailed study and solution in the future. Thank you. Thank you again, Yurevich. Olga Valentinovna, are you satisfied? Yes, thank you. These are the answers that I expected. Next, I would like to give the floor to Grachev Mikhail Nikolaevich. Thank you, dear colleagues. First, please tell me if you can hear me. Then, let me give you my opinion about Vadim Yurevich's thesis. But first, let me thank the colleagues of St. Petersburg University, the political science community. I am very grateful for the opportunity to speak to talk about this interesting work. The matter is that today, when we talk about digitalization of every sphere of our lives, we probably mean that one of the problems that political scientists should be studying is participation, or new forms of participation, citizen participation in political processes. And I think the author quite justly says that there are trends that confirm this positive development of digitalization. And maybe it should be noted that when we talk about the possibility to use these communication channels, between the government and the society, then maybe there is the question of how efficient this interaction is, how efficient how efficiently these channels are used by the society. And here, when talking about efficiency, of course, how do we assess such efficiency? Which criteria should we use to assess this interaction within the situation under study? And here, the thesis submitted by Evgenii Yurevich is of practical interest, and as well as of theoretical interest. So, and here, the situation is when you read the thesis, it's obvious that the material is quite logically presented. He starts by considering categories. This is civic participation, a smart city concept, creates his own model of interaction. Mikhail Nikolaevich, the sound is gone. Could you please repeat your last sentence and then tries? So maybe here in the foreground we can see the potential. So when this model is used as the theoretical basis of his empirical study, so maybe here we should understand that the model got proven and the theoretical statements they provide convincing practical data that fully correspond with what the author wanted to show in his work. And so maybe also should be said that interviewing 600 residents and civil servants, as Olga Valentina said, they enable to provide a reliable picture of such interaction, and here I have no doubt. So also I wanted to that it's difficult to interview residents, but even more difficult to interview officials. And the fact that the author is able to get inside this closed community adds novelty and element of objectivity in representing the picture, where we usually see the picture only from one side. And so this is an advantage of the thesis. Another point I would like to mention, so maybe I'd like to draw your attention to the in-depth analysis of the problem. When we see 225 sources in the list of sources for the candidate's thesis, that it demonstrates high professionalism of the author and who managed to study what was sources that were within his reach. And here we should say that 225 sources, they cannot cover everything. And of course, maybe similar studies were conducted in other countries. But more represent the list of literature would be better, would be improved if we talk about countries of Central and Eastern Europe. Here, of course, I would like to talk about the experience of Poland. So here would be very interesting, because I myself quite closely explored issues of electronic participation in post-Soviet countries. So here I may say that deserves a lot of interest. So this shown from the point of officials' point of view is very interesting, that in reality nothing like this I have not seen anything similar, and so maybe the are not difficult to penetrate. So in this, I see the main advantage of this work. So when we talk about advantages of the work, they determine certain drawbacks. It's a significant contribution of the author is connected with this. Unfortunately, it's impossible to... I hope you all have the text of the thesis. The institutional model on page 83. And here, in my opinion, the author should think about that this model does not explain how the forms and mechanisms are separated. In our opinion, the author should make a clearer distinction. The second thing related to the study itself and the sample, when the applicant describes Mikhail Nikolaevich, we cannot hear you. Will you please repeat your question? Mikhail Nikolaevich, can you hear me now? Yes, now we can hear you. Could you please repeat your second comment? So my second remark is applies to the procedure of the study. Unfortunately, the author does not explain his choice. As to ask citizens the use of different mechanisms. The third question I wanted to ask, as the author has already said, and he has already given this number, that full readiness to participate is expressed only by 16% of respondents. This result demonstrates that activity of the residents is quite low, and that may slow down the institutionalization process. But the question is still open. So what are the ways to overcome on the basis of your empirical data? How this empirical data can be interpreted? Why the percentage is so low? So when I asked the author this question, how can we explain this number? He said that the citizens are afraid, that they are afraid of negative consequences. But as we always discuss, if there is a hypothesis, there should be some alternative hypothesis. I think that we should think not only about the citizens being afraid, but also that they simply don't need this. There are other opinions and other studies which enable us to make this conclusion. For example, I watched quite closely the experiments conducted by our American colleagues, and while the face-to-face surveys are conducted, the efficiency is quite low. But when they try to do it online, the activity decreases dramatically. So maybe the real reason is that they don't need this. Anything connected with policy or governance is not in the focus of individuals. I think that this question is fairly relevant, because we need to overcome this passive attitude. So it will be interesting to see the reason for such passive attitude. Mikhail Nikolaevich, we cannot hear you again. Now, can you hear me now? Yes. 1, 2, 3. The problem is that to use this data in one about low activity, the models to overcome this can be difficult. That's why I repeat what was said by Professor Donay. Would be interesting to see why in Central or Eastern Europe these indicators are different. What I see in Western Europe, the indicators are very similar. So the bigger the city, the lower. So here it would be interesting to trace. So maybe the author will be interested in the future. He will focus on this in his future studies, because often we talk about I am watching what is happening in Moscow. It's not because they are scared, but they want somebody else to do this. So this is the problem of low individual activities. This is a serious problem about which we should think. But of course, it was not. So another thing I want to. So the author names in chapter 3 the risks of 3 institutional dimensions of electronic participation, but he and it seems that the or to increase efficiency of city governance, not we are not talking about achieving similar effects. And it seems, this is my last suggestion to the author, that there would be include in chapter 3 together with the description of obtained results. But these comments are only suggestions. They do not affect the significance and value of this work, which is both original and logically complete and independent study. And my general conclusion is that the thesis by Evgenii Yurevich on digitalization of electronic participation of Russian citizens in megapolis management on the example of St. Petersburg corresponds to the main requirements set by the order on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg University. And the author, Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich, deserves awarding the degree of candidate of political science, specialty 23002, political processes and institutions. Thank you. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated, and I tested the work of Evgenii Yurevich. I checked. So here everything is very clear, very clean, which is a must for the doctoral thesis. Thank you. Thank you, Mikhail Nikolaevich. We experienced some communication issues. So let me ask you if everything was clear. Maybe you were not, some things you were not able to hear, but all Mikhail Nikolaevich's comments, yes, everything was clear. Thank you then. Please answer. Thank you, Mikhail Nikolaevich, for your detailed review and for your comments. Let me tell you that according to the proposed model, which you can see on this slide, the forms of e-participation are treated in a broad sense. The project Smart City, which implies inclusion of citizens' views on decision-making in the field of urban management, the inclusion of citizens' proposals in the city budget, elimination of problems in landscaping, etc. Such mechanisms are communication channels that have been the subject of expert evaluations. The diagram shows both mechanism and form, but I agree that they could be highlighted more clearly. Second comment, the survey at MFCs was organized in an official way. The ability to interview the applicants was granted by the management, and the distribution of questionnaires was proportional between 6 districts of the city. These sites, where citizens of different age and age categories come. Taking into account the construction of represented sample by gender and age, we decided to apply to MFC for random selection of such respondents. Not having a significant resource base for conducting a telephone or other type of survey, we chose not to use online survey to avoid bias in favor of 100 of internet users in the sample. As for regarding your third comment, in the study we obtained data that allow us to talk about the functioning of communication channels of interaction between citizens and the government. The study of mechanisms to overcome such passive attitude was not set. At the same time, based on our research experience, the study of electronic public services, as people accumulate the positive experience, they usually recommend such portals to their friends and acquaintances. It can be assumed that with more information about the positive experience of e-civic participation, we should expect an increase in the activity of citizens on these sites. An interview with the developers of our St. Petersburg portal clearly indicates that the main factor in the explosive growth in the number of viewers was the so-called word of mouth. Regarding your next comment, the study we didn't set ourselves the task to assess severity of risks, but when conducting factor analysis received by communication channels, the most significant factors were identified for each type. As for the identified risks in the regulatory cognitive dimensions, according to the chosen, all 3 dimensions are significant for the institutionalization processes. Thus, from the point of improving efficiency, both the regulatory changes and changes in practices of using such channels and forming positive attitude to them are important. And regarding your last comment, I'd like to say that I believe that the layout of paragraph 2.2 coincides with the logic of description of the institutional model and based on categories and relationships in the model under consideration. For this reason, this material is presented in one place. Forms and mechanisms of civic participation are explained. Perhaps these descriptions should have been included directly in the same section. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you, Evgenii Yurevich. Mikhail Nikolaevich, were you able to hear the answers? Yes, thank you. I am satisfied. Thank you. Next, I would like to give the floor to Professor Smorgunov Leonid Vladimirovich. Dear colleagues, dear Evgenii Yurevich, I wrote a review and now I will give some opinions. Of course, paying more attention to my critical remarks that I will read, not to be distracted, because when you start thinking about some issues, you wander away and you come across new points that were not included. Of course, the theme is highly relevant, and not in the sense that is widening electronic presence and the civic participation with all that technology. The relevance is connected with the radical changes, the nature of public governance, and new technology. And here, the civic participation is not an external factor which increases trust to public governance or makes makes the authorities more accountable. I'm talking first of all about politicians and the civil officials, but a new system of co-governance emerges. And here, the civic participation is transforms the governance system and turns into co-governance and not into a separate governance factor. And here, in the thesis, I think in the thesis I did not see this understanding of the co-governance concept and some traditional approach to the system of civic participation and assessment of its role in the public space. The author talks a lot about the institutional matrices, but the institutional matrices of the new governance system is just emerging. Of course, it is affected by a number of institutional parameters embedded in the culture of governance, mentality, motives for participation, but it would be interesting to watch how the new matrix, the institutional matrix, is emerging of joint public governance. And in that sense, the topic is interesting. The topic of institutional structure and institutional mechanisms, the institutional environment of civic participation which transforms all spheres of interaction. And from that point, this structural formal organizational part of the work would assess positively. It satisfies me, and the first chapter where the questions about the changes, how the system changes, are discussed. So the author, in one way or another, develops his understanding of public governance on the basic of governance concept. Here, of course, horizontal links, networks. We are talking about the second chapter, which is dedicated to smart city proper, and the description of what civic or digital participation is. In structurally, it is correct. And here, maybe we should mention that the very concept of smart city cannot exist without electronic governance or civic governance. This is an inseparable element of the smart city concept. So when the author uses the scheme of his academic advisor, tries to define the concept of electronic participation and various factors or mechanisms of electronic participation, in general, this scheme can be accepted to set the question about factors, mechanisms, and forms of civic participation, but maybe to a smaller degree regarding the forms. In that respect, of course, if the thesis was called simply factors and forms of civic participation in the dissertation, there would be no questions which I got when reading this paper, because if we talk about the neo-institutional analysis, it should be full of appropriate scheme and concept, and this concept should be included in all the chapters. It should be developed and somehow reach the empirical study of which the author mentions. And of course, any study should rely on an empirical foundation. If we talk about the work, the methodological foundation of this work suggested by Richard Scott regarding this triple concept, the institutional structure is a working concept, and in that sense, we should have filled and developed it. The main purpose of the thesis, formally and from the point of positioning, the conceptual structure is completed. Here, all the tasks are manifested in the provisions set for defense. So from that point, the identified approaches, concepts and approaches allow us to conclude that this thesis contains a political concept of various social conditions for development of public participation and transformations that create some distortions on the level of implementation of the smart city idea. Of course, this paper, if we talk about its general structure, appears complete. Its main conclusions are well augmented. One thing is that the institutional aspect somehow disappears in the last part, dedicated to the empirical foundation, and the conclusions made on the basis of statistical analysis are quite trivial and not sufficiently described, and factors are a sum of variables which the authors try to define as factors, and the conclusions are flat about the mass survey of 600 persons. He is merely given facts. 16% agreed to participate in public governance. There are different attitudes and different trust levels. So what? How is the cognitive function of the institutions manifested in this trust? This is a motivation parameter that should be included from the point of the institutional analysis. So in this sense, the vision of the institutional structure is somewhat flat. If we are guided by the author's conclusions he makes on the basis of empirical study, so the relevant, significant drawbacks that I would like to mention of this thesis. First, in my opinion, the two parts, conceptual and empirical, do not create one whole. Hypothesis made on page 13. Here I have quoted it in my review, finds only remote expression in the conceptual part of the thesis. The analysis of mechanisms, not platforms, but mechanisms and regulations in the first two chapters are missing, that should be analyzed from the point of the general structure defining the civic participation. There's no in empirical study. Hypothesis does not pass through the necessary conceptualization stages, the selection of variables and their operationalization. The concept hypothesis appears in the final pages of the thesis, but only in the very general form of it being partly proven. But the author never explains what is the meaning of such partial verification. The concept of mechanism of civic participation, in our opinion, is too fragmented. Secondly, the institutional approach should be used in the work. I said that already, and it is present only formally as a scheme, though it does not appear to be a clearly structured model. The author uses some concepts of neo-institutionalism, three aspects: regulatory, normative, and cognitive, institutional traps, but they remain very general and not connected with the civic participation in the digital environment. Sometimes the institutional characteristics act as background, sometimes conditions, sometimes separate element of electronic participation, or sometimes the statements of the author. But in our opinion, they never characterize the complete institutional picture of the study. This is also visible in the empirical part devoted to evaluation of the citizens' assessment. The author writes about the significance of the value normative approach. This is the second element mentioned by Scott, but such wording is not included in the analysis of the value of civic participation, republicanism, citizenship, freedom, justice, equality, etc. 16%. So what are their values? What is their motivation in comparison with remaining 84%? Are there any coincidences, and what are the differences? The institutional, what could be the mechanisms for institutional stimulation? Because institutions also include stimuli or factors that affect our involvement. And all these aspects of participation are formed in the process of participation during the interaction, while citizens interact with the government. So that it would be interesting to see in the early stages of implementation of the smart city concept. So maybe the understanding of the smart city concept contains this element of lack of agreement of the structure and parameters, institutional parameters, acting as stimuli for mobilization. So here I'm trying to say that, of course, St. Petersburg is not the best city in this respect. From the point of level of development, there are other cities. For example, London. The picture of civic participation is different. Even in Moscow, there are two platforms: active citizens and crowdsourcing platform. Active citizen has 4,700,000 users, and crowdsourcing platform only 222,000. But the difference between these two platforms lies in the institutional structure of participation, where the first platform with 4 million users merely evaluation of what the mayor suggests, and the second platform is where citizens express their own ideas. And so that will be very interesting to for the future, for the future. But what I'm trying to emphasize here is that in St. Petersburg, it would be possible, it is possible to approach this analysis more careful from the point of conceptual structure, the in relation with connection with Scott's ideas. Next, the model of electronic participation. 83, page 83, I think, said it provides a very general description of participation. It includes levels and bodies of governance, participation platforms, digitalization projects, and some elements of the civic society. But where is participation? Electronic governance is participation. Is the author neither describes needs, interests, values, regulations, norms, and motives for participation in the electronic environment. So that should be the structure of the electronic participation model. Next, the thesis often demonstrates a purely declarative approach to description of processes and phenomena when the author simply lists problems, conditions, factors, and risks without due systematization and logic. But Foucault said that you may refer to when listing animals or fish, you may. But if we do science, we are used to systems based on criteria that can be given in an order of growth. So, well, here the author has just given a list, is just listing factors. But how are they connected with the general intention? You often, so, and there is an example, I have an example, as it's like jumps in the eye, as provisions 1 and 2 submitted for defense on pages 15. So where some factors are simply listed. Conclusion. These critical remarks affect the positive assessment of the thesis, yet the author, in principle, complies with all the necessary and sufficient criteria for a scientific qualification paper. The thesis is a political study of a significant theme of transformation of public governance in civic participation in modern Russia. The provisions submitted for defense are mostly justified and confirmed by empirical data, the study of scientific literature, the thesis by Vidiasov, Evgenii, Yurevich on the theme institutionalization of electronic participation of Russian citizens in Megapolis management corresponds to the basic requirements, and the author Vidiasov, Evgenii Yurevich, deserves being awarded the degree of Candidate of Political Science, Specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technology. Thank you. Thank you, Leonid Vladimirovich. Are you ready to answer? Thank you very much, Leonid Vladimirovich, for your comment. As for comments, the methodological apparatus of the study is based on concept categories within the new institutional model of e-participation. The scheme of institutional relations in the virtual space includes interaction between decision-making centers, the regulatory framework that regulates the rules of functioning of the infrastructure, that provides electronic interaction between citizens and the authorities. Under the proposed model, the mechanisms of civic engagement are considered within the following communication channels: portal for urban challenges, portal initiative, electronic reception rooms and crowdsourcing platforms, and electronic voting, and face-to-face meetings. These methods were chosen. 3 methods were used: the questionnaire method, formalized expert survey, and document analysis. We concept institutionalization of e-participation was operationalized in 3 dimensions: regulatory, normative, and cognitive. These indicators were used for evaluation and conclusions about partial confirmation of hypotheses. The mechanisms are communication channels that became the subject of expert evaluations as part of the empirical study. Next. Indeed, the value normative approach is the theoretical framework of the study. Paragraph 1.2 emphasizes that the principles of public value management are being implemented slowly and inconsistently in various regions. Executive authorities create their own electronic platforms to identify interests and preferences of the people. Along with the creation of platforms for discussion of city development region priorities, there's a trend of strengthening the state control of the processes taking place in the public sphere. The risks of failure in our country are extremely high due to the outright dominance of the state in the public sphere and fragmentation of the civil society activities. In our opinion, develop a model of institutional relations between the government and citizens to model e-governance, and is necessary to consider the socio-technical phenomena of e-participation, close connection with the general context, analysis of phenomena of e-government. Moreover, the institutional aspects, including norms and rules, formulated both in the legal framework and interrelated relations, are decisive. Analysis of the value range of the civil participation in a broad sense was not carried out because the focus of our work was on the areas of civic participation in the development of urban environment in the context of the introduction of smart city technology. This is a valuable recommendation for future research. As far as I know, expert community is now discussing ideas related to the need to develop a value model in determining priorities of the Smart St. Petersburg program. Next, the scheme of institutional relations in the virtual social space includes interaction between the decision-making centers, a regulatory framework that regulates the rules of infrastructure functioning and provides electronic cooperation between citizens and authorities. Also, the model includes the federal regional authorities and the civil society, which uses various channels of interaction with authorities. These channels can either be independent or embedded in the system of state information resources. Through these mechanisms, citizens and organizations can participate in decision-making on city management or influence actions of various institutions of state power to consciously set and achieve goals in the field of urban management. The study of specific needs, interests, values, regulations, standards, and motives for participation in the electronic interaction shall be the continuation of my work. The study submitted for defense was aimed at understanding the principles, mechanisms, and specific features of function of the institutional relations. So the model reflects more of the organizational spectrum of interaction of entities involved in the electronic interaction between citizens and businesses. At next stages, I shall take these recommendations into consideration. And to your fourth comment, I tried to systematize the main descriptions, operationalization of concepts, and found discrepancies. Regarding the first provisions in the list I have presented, I may say that these lists result from the theoretical analysis and analysis of research of foreign and Russian authors. Overview of these works are given in paragraphs 1.1, 1.2, and 2.1 of the thesis. Perhaps some wordings in the paper should have been corrected using a more descriptive approach. Thank you very much for your comments. Thank you. Leonid Vladimirovich, are you satisfied Yes, I will take notice of the answers. Well, and the final review is mine as the chairman of the Dissertation Council. I will allow myself to drop the part on relevance and the positive points that have been mentioned almost by all council members. Complete nature, a great number of sources used, the empirical study, and I will focus only on the drawbacks. First, what I would like to mention, that was mentioned already, the author's hypothesis. In the study, I'm quoting, the electronic mechanisms of civic participation on condition of the institutionalization approved by the government function better than the traditional forms of feedback. And here, for me personally, it's not quite clear how's the author going institutionalization in the form of indicators. So maybe that was incorrect wording. And also, it appears that in that form, hypothesis is very trivial and hardly requires any serious proof. Obviously, because of the operation of mechanisms of electronic participation as compared with traditional. So technically, it is very obvious and needs no proof. Secondly, the author mentions, so this is another this drawback has already been mentioned, is the methodology. To me, it's not quite clear this of neo-institutional approach and Richard Scott concept, which is emphasized by the author, the neo-institutional approach and the concept of Scott. So in that case, the concept appears to be something different from the neo-institutional approach, which is a separate methodology or maybe a theory, or even a theory, and in that sense it's not clear to which theoretical field in which field the author puts. In the first provision submitted for defense, the author lists factors of introduction of mechanisms of electronic civic participation in megacity management. It's not quite clear where and when and where they were defined. Are these factors universal or can be applied only to contemporary Russian situation? In the second provision, the author describes the trend of public developments that occurs in network political governance, and among other things mentions specific features of Russian mentality and the territorial public self-governance, as well as specific structure of Russian civil society, which provides for special relations with the state. The trend is traditionally understood as orientation or direction of development, which can hardly be applied to the above-mentioned conditions of factors. Thus, in the specific structure can hardly be defined as trend. So the author is mixing up two concepts. In the fourth provision, the author says that institutionalization of mechanisms of participation is guaranteed by a number of factors and social, economic, organizational, and technological variables specific to each communication channel. if we accept this wording, it's not quite clear what the author is going to prove here, and is not quite the phrase institutionalization is guaranteed by the impact of social, economical, organizational, technological variables. Because when we guarantee something, usually we mean the necessary conditions are available. So thus is yet these critical remarks apply to wordings used by the author, but they are not of formal nature, because these are so here we're talking about the wordings and the reason for us being here. So these they are not typos, they are not slips of the tongue, but yet the overall conclusion is that these critical remarks have no impact on the depth of exploring the subject, and do not affect the high assessment of its independence and originality. Thus, a thesis by Vidiasov, Evgenii, Yurevich, Institutionalization of the electronic participation of Russian citizens in the Megapolis management on the example of St. Petersburg, corresponds to the basic requirements set by the order on the 1st of September 2016, number 6821/1, on awarding academic degrees at St. Petersburg State University. And the applicant, Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich, deserves being awarded the degree of Candidate of Political Science, Specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies. Article 11 of the above-mentioned order has not been violated by the author. Chairman of the Decision Council, Kurychkin Alexander Vyacheslavovic. The floor is yours, Yuri Evgeniyevich. Thank you, Alexander Vyacheslavovic, for your review and for your comments. In my thesis, the concept of institutionalization of e-participation was operationalized, which represents indicators in 3 dimensions. The regulatory dimension includes assessment of urban development goals, mechanisms for processing citizens' appeals and decisions in the field of urban development, and mechanisms for implementation of smart city projects. The normative dimension includes parameters for the use of information technologies, the level of internet penetration, preferences in the choice of communication channels. And finally, the cognitive dimension includes parameters for evaluating e-participation mechanisms, awareness of mechanisms for participation in city management, priorities for urban development, the citizens' expectations, and readiness to participate in the city management. These indicators were used for evaluation, and conclusions are made about the partial confirmation of the hypothesis. The study is based on provisions of new institutional approach and the concept of SCOT, which is also an example of development of the new institutional approach. The new institutional approach provides for a shift in emphasis from the study of formal structures to the study of a set of norms and values, and focuses on the social cultural conditionality of political process institutions. The main factor in the formation and evolution of institutions is legitimacy in perception of these institutions by the society. Scott's concept develops these ideas and presents 3 institutional dimensions: regulatory, normative, and cognitive. The choice of this concept was determined by its potential for the subject of the study. 3. The list of factors was formed on the basis of the theoretical analysis of works of foreign and Russian authors, as well as the results of previous research. In the logic of the thesis, these factors are universal and are also found in modern Russia. 4. In this case, I'd like to clarify the wording and emphasize that the designated specific features in mentality, self-government structure, and civil society are evaluated in historical retrospect. Probably it would be more correct to formulate these points as follows. The historically developed features of Russian mentality and territorial public self-government, as well as the historically developed specific structure of the Russian civil society. And finally, in the study, based on the obtained expert assessments, a factor analysis of the significance of socio-economic, organizational, and technological variables for each channel is carried out. Using this method, the most significant groups of factors are identified. Thus, the results of grouping these significant parameters for each of the studied channels are submitted for defense. Thank you for your comments. Thank you, Evgenii Yurevich. I am satisfied with your answers. And now, dear colleagues, let me ask you if anyone present here willing to speak or ask any questions, maybe? No. Have we received any questions through the website? No. Then let me give the floor to the academic advisor of the applicant, Chugunov Andrei Vladimirovich. Please make it 2-3 minutes. Please tell us about the work of the applicant, not about his thesis. We have read his thesis and understood everything. Thank you, Andrei Vladimirovich. Dear colleagues, dear chairman, first, let me thank you for this work was accepted for consideration at St. Petersburg University. The theme, I will not talk about the topic. It has been discussed a lot already and in detail. Everything has been discussed in detail. The topic is in the mainstream of our research, of activity of our research center, electronic participation. We are studying from various angles and obtaining such professional expert opinion was very important for us. So I'm very glad this has happened. The applicant himself is very persistent, as you can see yourselves, I think. Already being a doctoral student, he overcame all the difficult stages of the educational process. And at that, he was able to combine the three roles working as for the local government, which assisted. So when we wanted to decide what we will explore, we realized it has to be connected with the current activity of the applicant, and it should provide some benefits for his professional activities. And his involvement as a public servant when in dealing with the appeals of the citizens provided us with new opportunities which have already been mentioned, access to the target audience, and made our study more trustworthy. Recruiting experts is a hard job. And here I watched the quality of these officials, not simply municipal officials, but those involved in this process. And so my opinion as the academic advisor is that Evgenii Yurevich Vidiasov deserves awarding the degree candidate of political sciences, And once again, I would like to thank you for your very careful consideration of his work and for your critical remarks, which some of which we have already identified as the future spheres of our research. And so that was the first step, without which it's impossible to move forward in the sphere of motivation. If so, that will be another study, and which would be very expensive. So this set, well, we will take everything into account. So the critical remarks and suggestions, I think we will turn them into project proposals, which we will submit. We will submit them to the city, and I'm not sure the city is ready to finance such a study at the moment. Thank you. Thank you, Andrei Vladimirovich. The opinion of your academic advisor is clear. Since our session is held in the mixed mode and most of the council members are working in the remote access mode, do dissertation council members or maybe the applicant himself have any unclear or unanswered questions, maybe connected with working in the remote access mode? Questions asked today for technical reasons or for some other reasons. Do you still have any unanswered questions? Everything was heard. No, I don't have any questions either. So everything was heard and understood properly. Dear colleagues, now we have the opportunity to, before we vote, to take a technical break to discuss the result of today's defense. Sound shall be switched off. So do we need such a break, or do all the members already have all the opinion? No, I think we don't need such a break. No, we don't. So we already have. No, we don't need a break. Very well. I actually agree that everything is clear and everything has been said. That is why we can start voting. That is why, dear colleagues, let me ask you to check that you can all see and hear each other, because the most important part of our session is coming. I beg your pardon, Alexander Vyacheslamovich. I cannot see you. It's just a black square. Not only you. We cannot see you. You cannot see me. Please. So can you see us? Yes, I can see you perfectly well. And I can hear all of you. Okay, now we can see you. Alexander Vyacheslamovich, Andrei Vladimirovich, you log off. Dear colleagues, can you see me well at the moment? Yes. Then I put the question of awarding to Vidiasov, Evgenii Yurevich, the degree of Candidate of Political Science, Specialty 230002, Political Institutions, Processes and Technologies, to the open individual vote. Let me remind you that a decision of the Dissertation Council on awarding a degree shall be considered positive if more than a half, but not less than 3 council members vote for it. Those present according to Article 23 of the Order. Let's start. Council member Popova Olga Valentinovna, your opinion, please. Dear colleagues, I believe Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich deserves awarding the degree of Candidate of Political Sciences, Specialty 230002. Thank you, Olga Valentinovna. Council members Morgunov Leonid Vladimirovich. I am for awarding the degree. Thank you. Council member Grachov Mikhail Nikolaevich, your opinion? I am for awarding the degree of Candidate of Political Science. Thank you. Council member Donai Lukash, I am also for awarding the degree. Thank you. I heard you. Me, Chairman of the Council, Kuruchkin Alexander Vyacheslamovich, also have a positive opinion, and I vote for awarding the degree of Candidate of Political Science to Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich. Thus, dear colleagues, guests, dear applicant, let me inform you that out of 5 voting members, 4 persons voted for awarding the degree, no one voted against, and no one abstained. Thus, the decision on awarding to Vidiasov Evgenii Yurevich the degree of Candidate of Political Science, Specialty 230002, Political Institution, Processes and Technologies, has been made unanimously. Once again, let me ask, since our session is held in the remote access mode, do council members, or maybe the applicant, or anyone present here, have any questions regarding or comments to the procedure of today's session? I see that council members have no questions, and the applicant has no questions, neither questions nor comments. Let us give the floor to Evgenii Yurevich for his closing remarks. I would like to express my deep gratitude and give big thanks to all the Dissertation Council members. This is a very important milestone for me. I am very grateful to you for this such in-depth study of my thesis, and all your comments will be used in my future research. Also, I'd like to thank my academic advisor, Andrei Vladimirovich. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, Evgenii Yurevich. On behalf of the Dissertation Council and on behalf of myself personally, let me congratulate you on successful defense of your thesis and wish you future success. Your academic advisor said you are not going to stop. He will not allow you to stop. So in foreseeable future, we will organize defense of your doctoral thesis if it is written. On my behalf, I would like to especially thank Professor Dona Lukasz for taking part and for such active participation. It's really important to know the opinions of our foreign colleagues, especially in this topic, and the fact that Dona Lukasz for the second time agreed, not only agreed, but actually was very willing and worked very hard on analysis of the text is very important for us. Thank you very much, Professor Donai. I hope that our next meeting will be face-to-face, because we can't even take a glass of tea to toast a new candidate. Let me congratulate you once again. At that, I think I will declare our session closed. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.